fog. Experiencing some turbulence. Can I stop? Видите работаю? Ступить обратно. Здесь ступить обратно. 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Everybody, it's Professor Brian Kopersky, and I'm back again with another Mouth of the Wolves Round Table special edition today, featuring our hostess with the mostest, Laura Estrada Prada, joined today by David, Colin, and our esteemed President Hodges. How are you, everybody? Welcome.
Good, very good. I've just been to the dentist and feel very good to have survived.
Thank you for being here, Richard, and thank you, David.
Thanks everybody for coming as well.
And thank you, Professor, for having us.
Well, you're always welcome here.
It's my pleasure.
So, your beautiful wife gave me a wonderful idea to start off this conversation. So, David, you're the son of our founder, and you have many insights on the history of this university. And but apart from that, I'd really like to start off with asking you a little bit about your childhood, because it's almost Halloween. I know you were a child star in a couple of horror movies, so let's start there.
Okay, so this is also on video. So if you are able to see me, you can see some fair skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. And I was born in Italy, and you'd probably put it together that there weren't many of us who appeared this way. So putting me into an audition, 200 some odd kids, somehow my father got wind of this, and so they put me in and I won the part. This was when I was 3 years old.
Wow.
And if anyone is old enough to remember Nanny and the Professor, or watched American soap operas, Passions, I think it was called. The actress was Juliet Mills. She played my mother. The very famous British actor, Richard Johnson, Boys from Brazil, and many others. He played, I don't want to spoil a movie, so I'll just say played a very important part. And for any Italian files, Gabriele Labia was my father in it. And it was a bad Italian horror movie. Can we edit that part out, that it was bad? It was an Italian horror movie produced by Ovidio Assonitis, and he went by different names, also Oliver Hillman. So no one's quite sure exactly what his name and true identity were. And he put this movie together. It was a slick, sick Exorcist ripoff, to quote one of the many critics who clearly that critic appreciated the movie. My father loved it because I was in it. My mother had a very good time getting to know Ms. Mills. Ms. Mills was very, very pleasant to me. And it was a very fun time for me. It was rollicking. Even though I was 3 years old, going on 4, I do remember making that movie, a few memories here and there, such as the great fun of it took place in San Francisco, and what happens in San Francisco but earthquakes. So of course that meant we had to have an earthquake scene with my sister and me sitting in the room. This was a room set up with 3 walls on top of a gimbal, and the gimbal consisted of 2 logs horizontal to the floor but perpendicular to each other. At the end of each log were some burly men who would bounce the logs up and down. And put this together, you'd have an earthquake. And that was the most fun part of the movie for me. It was fantastic. It was wonderful. That was also the part where this 3 going on 4-year-old was actually acting, because I was having a great time, but I had to be crying.
Because you had to be scared, obviously.
I had to be scared. The light was flashing, and my sister next to me, and we were supposed to be terrified, but instead we were having a great time. So that was the first movie. I ended up running into Richard Johnson. Laura and I ran into him in London not that long ago. Well, actually, now it is. It was about 10 years ago in Leicester Square. We happened to see the Agatha Christie play on the half-price tickets, and then there were none. And I noticed in the playbill, hey, Richard Johnson's in this. I wonder if we pass a note, would we actually be able to go see him? Sure enough, the one of the crew, one of the staff actually came by during the show and passed us the note back. Said, Mr. Johnson would love to see you. So after the show, they directed us backstage, and we had a lovely glass of wine with him. And he was very, very, very gracious and very lovely to get to know. First thing he asked was how I was doing, and that's a great way to get someone to disarm them when it's someone of his renown and his stature.
He was a great Shakespearean actor.
True.
Yeah, and that's where he made his name. I'm amazed he was in this. And the actress was, did you say Juliet Mills?
That's right. She played my mother.
The daughter of John Mills.
Right.
Probably the most famous British actor of the 20th century, other than Laurence Olivier.
And director as well.
Yes.
And she was so sweet to me. We celebrated my 4th birthday because production was running long.
Right.
And she actually did give me a couple birthday gifts, some wooden ships. And it was a very nice time. It took place in San Francisco, so we did have to fly out there. That introduced me to the wonderful city that San Francisco is. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. Granted, I haven't been east of Turkey, so it's been a limited part of the world. But yes, of course, Rome is one of my favorites as well.
So they actually filmed it in San Francisco?
The exterior. The interior was at Cinecittà.
I was going to say, that makes sense, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And one of the most stressful parts, I'll say, was the constant pressure of time and not tripping over all of the cables.
Right.
There was a lot of stuff that you had to walk around and over.
But that must have been your first trip to San Francisco.
Yes, it was.
Yes. The era of Bullitt. I'm older than you, yes. Steve McQueen made San Francisco super famous at that time.
That's a great movie.
Yes.
If you haven't seen it, you need to.
Yes. Wonderful movie. Yes.
The car chases.
First great car chase, and that was Yates made that. He was another Brit who made that film. A wonderful film because it's probably the best film Steve McQueen made, really, simply because he was in his own space driving like a maniac up and down San Francisco. But it's extraordinary that they flew you all the way to San Francisco to simulate an earthquake.
I was all cost and transportation, no salary.
And so did you have a follow-up? Sorry,
No, go ahead.
There was a follow-up. There was a sequel. In name only, it was, depending on the market, it was called Beyond the Door 2. The first one was Beyond the Door.
Right.
In Italian, it was called Chi Sei.
Right.
And I believe there's a poster of it somewhere floating around the school here.
Right.
We do have a couple posters of it. My parents were quite proud of the endeavor, so of course they snapped up as many movie posters as they could. And as we've come across different movie fans throughout the years, we've given away some of these posters to them. They're not worth anything, so and we figured the fans would appreciate them, and yeah, I think they have. Of course, what's ironic is the same fans would give me a movie poster in return.
Right.
But yes, so the first one was Beyond the Door. So the second one was called Beyond the Door 2. Because the first one, even though, well, I'm not sure exactly, there are differing reports on if it was actually shut down. Again, the first one by lawyers and such, because it was such a close ripoff, such a close mimic of The Exorcist. Although I will point out that I think Rosemary's Baby does not get enough credit as having been ripped off in the first movie, because there is pregnancy and and some other Rosemary's Baby aspects of that first movie.
Right.
But the second movie, otherwise, other than my presence in it, had nothing to do with the first movie. So Beyond the Door 2, in Italian, it was called Shock. During production, they were bantying about different titles for that second movie. One of them was Suspense, and there were some others as well that I forget. So I was 6 years old for this one, for the second one. In this one, it was, again, we had a Brit. It was John Steiner, who played my stepfather. He was very popular in Italian horror cinema, but he'd also done some very famous, well-known Hollywood movies as well. And the woman who played my mother is Daria Nicolodi, whom I'm still in contact with, actually, to this day. And the director was Mario Bava. So he's credited as being the director, that as this was the last movie that he completed before his death. His son was very much involved, Lamberto. And that was a lot of fun to make as well, a whole lot of fun, especially being 6 years old, that I could remember more and have more fun, run around.
I have a question, though. I've always wondered with the idea of The Exorcist, no? When children are young, how much do you really get scared? After that, did you change? Did you not change? Were you scared? Did you live it like a game? Because one thing is to be an actor as an adult, and another one is to be a child actor in a horror movie.
Well, part of being an actor, my understanding, because I'm not a professional, I have not taken acting classes, is drawing from yourself. And to draw from yourself, you have to have lived some experiences. Otherwise, you're just faking it. And faking it as an actor, people can tell. So that means there's very limited life experience to draw from when you're a child, which is why it's very special when you see a child actor on whatever screen, on whatever stage, doing so well that they are special. It means they really do have talent. As opposed to this creature here, not very much talent. So not much experience and not much that I could get away with pretending. So really I was told what to do, when to do, at what pace, what movements to make, and I had a script to follow. So making the movie, being part of the mechanics of it all, it was not scary at all. It was really just about fun, or the slight inconveniences. They had to put some body makeup on me for a moment when Juliet Mills is supposed to have gotten upset and smacked me. And as a little child, some makeup that would last, it wouldn't wash off. Just whatever we did, it would not come off. Of course, also getting a 3-year-old to bathe, that's another matter. And it stayed on there it seemed forever. It was only 2 weeks. But it's still just, for this kid, it was just much too long. So that was the worst of it. That was the most inconvenient. Otherwise, being on the other side of the screen, that's when the magic has come to fruition, and that's what makes you scary. So when I watch the movie, when I watch the results of either movie, it still makes me jump sometimes, and creeps me out sometimes. In the second movie, there is a scene where I run toward Daria down a corridor, and I had to do my own stunt work. I had to take a dive to the floor. And in place, my dead father had to pop up, and it was a great jump scare.
Wow.
Well, we had to get it just right, which meant many retakes. First, for every scene, we always rehearsed a number of times in the second movie that I remember. And so every rehearsal meant I had to run down and jump to the ground. And then again, we had to do several retakes. Every time, it was at least a dozen times that this little frame kept throwing himself down. My knees were banged up. My elbows were banged up. Being very careful not to smack the face on the ground, because then everything would be done for the day. And that was a lot of fun, but painful. Again, doing my own stunt. So that was because I was behind the scenes that I wasn't scared. Even with this guy hanging around with this god-awful makeup, because he's supposed to be dead and is very, very phantasmagoric. And in the end, though, when you're watching it in the audience, it's a great jump. It's a great scare. There are lots of other good scary moments in that movie as well.
Well, we'll have to watch it. It is the season right now.
Did they pay you for the second one?
Well, they actually did pay me for the first one as well. It was not much at all.
Right.
And the second movie, they did pay me a little bit more.
Right.
There weren't any royalties involved. So invested wisely, growing with compound growth, it was able to augment on itself so that I could pay for college on my own.
Really? Oh, wow.
Just barely.
Wow. Back in 76, they were using coupons instead of money in Rome. Do you remember that?
I don't remember this.
Yes, they were. Because they had problems with money supply. So banks were printing their own coupons, 100 lira, 200 lira, 50 lira. So the fact they paid you was fantastic.
Well, it was in the contract. I can't say that we were actually paid.
Right.
I never saw the cash.
Yeah, right.
Were you here in the 70s? When did you get here, Richard?
First time I came to Rome was in 1970 to see the archaeology, obviously. I was about to go to university to study archaeology. And I came to Florence, Rome, and Naples, and I went for 3 weeks looking at different archaeological sites. But actually, I had a wonderful experience in Rome because friends of mine lived on the Via Pellegrino, and there he was a composer, Jocelyn Lubbock, and he had worked with Frederick Delius when he was very young. So I had a sort of experience both between archaeology and music and that year. Then I came back in 71 on my way to Turkey, and I bought a Che Guevara t-shirt because I forgot how hot it was, and was lucky not to end up in a camp in Turkey and Midnight Express for wearing Che Guevara. I was really berated for that. And then I came back for Christmas in 1975 to set up a project in Sicily, start a project in Sicily in 1976, 77, 78. And that project was what really drew me into Italy, because I've been working in Northern Europe. And at that time, Italy was strained, actually, and that the coupons, which I remember vividly, because you could only use them in certain places. So each village had its own coupons issued by its own bank, were a manifestation of a greater instability, which for a Brit at that time didn't seem anything special, but I think for the country was rather special. For a Brit it didn't seem special because we were suffering the problems in Northern Ireland, which had come across to the mainland. But the Red Brigade were very present in 75, 76, and I was constantly stopped at that time. I had a beard and all the rest of it and looked German. It's hard to imagine now. And so when I came back to seriously excavate, and I'll stop then, came back to seriously excavate in Italy in 78, it was obvious that the country was going through some real stress. And in 79, I got arrested twice in one day. And on the second occasion, I was taken to a caserma, and the Maresciallo wouldn't speak English to me. He would only speak German because he was convinced, because I was driving a VW, that I had to be a member of the Baader Meinhof supporting the Red Brigade. But in actual fact, these were blissful eras, wonderful, wonderful times as I remember them, because people were so kind, and there was just there was just such an air of wonderful joy in the Mediterranean once you came to terms with it. It was really blissful.
What I do remember of the economy then was the inflation of the Italian lira.
Yes.
And of the politics and the feeling of tightness. It was also at the time when Aldo Moro was kidnapped and eventually killed.
Yes.
That I remember the helicopters always circling above, and it feeling very oppressive, and people were nervous. I was actually just telling some friends this story yesterday, that the Red Brigades had a cache of weapons that they were keeping in the building directly next door to my school.
Right.
My father dropped me off for school one day. We were wondering why the road was blocked off by the police, by the Carabinieri. And there it was. We were just wondering what was going on. They said, "Oh, we just found another cache of Red Brigade weapons next door to this school for kids who were 10 and under."
Right.
Well, what can you do?
Yes, it was. There was that level of stress all over Europe at that time. I was working on museum collections rather than field archaeology between 73 and 76. So I traveled to lots of different countries, France, Spain, Germany in particular, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and everywhere you felt that level of stress. But in Italy, it still seemed a country which was enjoying a level of good times despite the inflation. Britain was really suffering. Mm-hmm. So I felt rather lucky to be in Italy. And I always remember New Year's Eve, 1st of January or 31st of December, whichever you see it, 75, 76, walking along the Via Pellegrino, and they were throwing out toilets and throwing everything out of the windows with such great glee that there seemed a humour and an energy that was certainly missing in Britain at that time.
Is this the street next to Campo dei Fiori?
Yes, yes.
And I can imagine that piazza being quite busy and raucous.
It was very raucous, a very different way to what it is today, where it's full of students. At that time, it was very much a community and a lot of expats were living around there, and so it was blissful, absolutely blissful. I really enjoyed coming to Italy, though I had an old car, and needless to say, it broke down every so often. And I remember I broke down in 1977 on the way back from Sicily, in Calabria, and the man who mended it said, "We have nothing to fit this with." He was Australian, actually, an Australian Italian who'd come back. "We have nothing we can put in here, so we will put in the pieces from a lawnmower." And he put these pieces in from a lawnmower into my car, the accelerator cable.
Was this the Volkswagen?
No, this was a Ford Taunus at that time, before the Volkswagen. And he put it in, and I always thought, wow, this is such technical brilliance, and it worked until it broke in a snowstorm when I was doing a salvage excavation in the Peak District. That's the Pennines of England the following spring. And I always remember the Automobile Association man came out to look, and he said, "What the hell is this? Expletive you've got in this car?" I was meant to dig up a dead Roman that day, and I couldn't do it because the cable fitted in Calabria broke.
Oh no.
So now that I have both of you here, and we're all curious to know the history of AUR, yours from what you remember, from what you know from your father, from anything and everything, and you from archaeological. You have the best stories about what the building here was. And you also know a little bit, so it might be good for our listeners, who most of them I'm sure don't know most of this history, to know a little bit about AUR, given that it's our common denominator, I'd say.
So when my father had been here in Italy during World War II, And during that time, he got to know people across Italian society in different sectors and industries. And that included people who shared a similar view of bringing people together to listen to be exposed, and to share different points of view on whatever. That came to in terms of being tangible, that came to a point of something that would be a school. But it was still a country that was recovering from World War II. And it was very hard to find anything that could be, locationally speaking, that could be cohesive. So it was a struggle, and it was a bit of a scramble for my father and his colleagues to find something that could actually be a physical school, especially something with a campus. It was so it was a lot of effort, a lot of trouble, a lot of scrambling. My father, one of them ended up finding this apartment, this office space near the Spanish Steps, and this was in the late 60s. So real estate was still inexpensive, and the previous tenant had gone out of business. So my father bought this space, and that became the first office space, the first classroom space for AUR, and it was a small space. It's about 1,100 square feet, if you're thinking in English terms. And I think that makes it about, 100 square meters, roughly. So it's since been converted into an apartment, into a residence, so it can fit 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a kitchen. It's a fully functioning abode. But back then, it also was, they were making do, my father and his colleagues, to make something that could work and be viable and something that could last. They would have lectures there, again drawing from the experience and the context that my father had during the war. He was able to bring in people from all over Italian industry, and they would come in and give lectures. And the students, it was still a growing student body, and it was a student body that there were a good number of Americans, but also a number of Italians and some other European countries as well. And every now and then there'd be a party there, a small celebration. This is not the place where I grew up. Where I grew up instead, that was out on the Cassia. Well, on the Cassia, just inside the Ring Road. And it's where, I guess it's because it's where a lot of other American expats lived, near the American Overseas School of Rome, where my sister attended. And at that space, since it was bigger, they would have students out for parties and celebrations, pizza and Coke, and whatever my father could do, and my mother would help as well, and their colleagues, whatever they could do to make the school work. It was, I wouldn't say by the seat of their pants, but they were resourceful. They were trying to make sure that it was something that could be amenable to bringing together people of different backgrounds, different walks of life. And they ended up coalescing around the idea of a school without walls, something that could, drawing from the fact that they couldn't have at that time a single campus, a single physical space. Students had to live in different parts of the city for their rooms. That's how I'd sum it up. It was people being resourceful, drawing on what they could to make things work.
Well, as an alum, I didn't know your father, obviously, but what I hear and what I know of what your father dreamed for the university, I see a parallel in what Richard dreams now as the next step for AUR. So I don't know, am I wrong? What are your thoughts on what AUR was and what AUR will be?
Well, I think it's very interesting to reflect back nearly 50 years. When I came here first in 1970, 25 years after the end of the war, Americans were absolutely beloved. Wherever you went, they were beloved because they had helped and they played a huge role, not just in turning things around at the end of the Second World War, but more significantly, they'd invested in the country, in the Marshall Plan, and given a huge amount to this country. So young students were always welcome. But nevertheless, in comparison with today, there were comparatively few American students. So the American University of Rome was probably the fourth, fifth, sixth program, American program in the city in the 1960s. It was very innovative. And from that standpoint, it belonged to a moment where the United States was, or rather its universities, were really taking an interest in Italy because it seemed to be a more stable post-war country. And secondly, they saw it as a place that was a springboard to not just Europe, but also the Mediterranean. And that's why, for example, when I came here in 71, we drove from here to the excavations we were doing in southwest Turkey, which you would never think of today, but that's what we did. We drove in Land Rovers for 3 days to Izmir to get there with all the equipment. Now, today, Italy is still the same country in terms of its role in Europe, but it's far more important in terms of the Mediterranean and Africa, especially Africa, where the population is going to double or treble in the next 50 years. We're a country that's genuinely suffering from climate change, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's not a surprise that Rome rather, is where the food organizations are based. We think of Rome as the eternal city and its archaeological remains, and of course that's important, but its place in the world today is as an axiomatic director of what's happening in North Africa and Central Africa in particular, and it still plays a key role in the politics of the Middle East as essentially a country that's always been able to find a way between the great powers to help look forward. In many Middle Eastern countries, it's played a fantastic role as a diplomatic nation. So my view of the American University of Rome is to take those genuine roots about the kinds of people who are here and obviously the wonders of the place in terms of its past, but in terms of its future as a place to learn, it's a remarkable capital city because it's a European capital, it's a Mediterranean capital, it's a capital that has its sights on the future in terms of what happens in a continent that really is at risk in terms of demography and climate over the next generations. For students from anywhere in the globe to study in this wonderful place at this time, I think is a genuine privilege.
My father fell in love with the country during the war. He did various things during the war, but he loved the people, he loved the culture, he loved the society and what life was like in Italy. And he saw it at a very desperate time. And he was working with people to help defeat the enemy. And it was of course, you're going to grow tight bonds during such an intense situation. But he also saw that under such duress, people could still hold on to their sense of living and how to live and their enjoyment for life. And that was definitely one of the things that drew him to this country, to Rome specifically, and being a place that people from all over were very happy to come to. For centuries, people would be coming to Rome, and that was for obvious reasons. So that in addition to being in where Rome is geographically, in the middle of the Mediterranean, it affords the opportunities for materials to be distributed to where they need to go, say in Africa, and the Middle East as well. But also culturally, that we all know about how it, the role that Rome played in history. It's not just because of who the culture was and what the politics were of millennia ago, but also part of the geography and what that led to in how society evolved in the country and in Rome itself. Because Rome is, the people of Rome are quite proud of being Roman as opposed to being Italian, say. And it was also at the time of starting of American University of Rome that sure, it's nice to hear that they were very appreciative of Americans and the efforts in the Marshall Plan, but also they very much appreciated, my understanding, my studies, is that they also appreciated the sense of effort, the sense of go get them that the Americans put in, that the Americans contributed. And it was that spirit that Italians seemed to certainly appreciate coming from America. And it was that cohesiveness, that the synergy. I don't like using that word, but it was a synergy, bringing to the best parts of those societies together. And of course, also the family heritage, the family roots that Americans would have with Italy, obviously as well played a part in that, I think.
Okay. I don't know. Would you like to add anything else to our conversation? Thank you. It's all very interesting.
It's a lot of fun.
I do think that when you look back and read what the Americans and British soldiers felt about Italy in the Second World War, what you discover is despite the hardship, there was absolutely profound love of the people because of their generosity and because of their sunny attitude to life and as a whole. So you can never evade the fact that Italy is special.
And there was
we all
also
fall in love, we all stay.
Yes, this is true. I was going to add also the difference in what was going on in other parts of Europe, the expulsions of people and the extermination of groups, not part of Roman, Central and Southern, at least Italian culture. I think that was played part of it too.
Yes, I think Italy's obviously struggled to find its way forward economically, but as a country, the hospitality, the whole sense of life, the vivacity, has not diminished one iota. And I think many people today find exactly what people were writing about 100 years ago in the joy of the place.
It's not so hard to be so joyful and nice and welcoming when the weather is amazing.
Yes,
and
exactly.
it's so nice here.
But one of the special things one learns from being in Italy as a foreigner is they don't want to have the light come into the room. They want to keep the window shut and so on. There are wonderful paradoxes that still entertain me, but nevertheless, where else in the world is the light as precious as it is here?
Mm-hmm. And the sunsets.
Yes, and the sunsets. Absolutely.
Okay, one last thing. A very simple question, but I think it might be hard, given that I'm asking for a 1-2 answer.
Oh, from these two people here?
From you two, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Why AUR? Because we've talked about Rome, we've talked about the meaning of Rome as a city, the value of an American education in a city like Rome and its value politically, economically, historically. Why AUR?
Because it's eternal.
Wow.
Because
David?
It's unique.
Thank you. That was very good. I thought that I was challenging you. It didn't work. Va bene, I don't want to keep you anymore because I know you have very busy lives. But thank you for joining us. Thank you, Brian, again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Hey, that's it. Thanks to everybody, to our hostess, Laura Estrada Prada, President Richard Hodges, and our esteemed guest, David Colin Jr. Keep tuning in to Mouth of the Wolves, weekly, bi-weekly, when we can. We'll see you on the next episode. Check us out on SoundCloud and on iTunes.